I don't know when I started seeing them. Maybe they were always there, just beyond the edges of my vision, waiting for me to notice. But now, every time I glance between the trees, I swear I see something, a shape, a flicker of movement, the suggestion of a face staring back at me. Not human. Not animal. Something else. I tried telling myself it was just a trick of the light, the play of shadows in the branches, but when I turned my head too quickly, I saw them move. Not away, not deeper into the forest, but closer. They shift when I blink. Emily sees them too. I can tell because she won't stop shaking, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she's trying to hold her body together. Every time I catch her gaze, she looks like she is on the verge of tears, but she refuses to say anything. I think she is too scared that speaking will make them more real. Sam won't even look at us anymore. And Jake? Jake smiles. Now, that you are interested in this story, let's start this story from the beginning. Part 1, The Abandoned Campsite. Posted by you/Ryan Wanders 3 days ago. I've always loved camping. The quiet, the isolation, the feeling of being completely off the grid, it's the only thing that makes me forget about the constant noise of life. That's why my friends and I planned this trip, 4 days in the deep woods, no cell service, no distractions. Just us, the trees, and the open sky. At least, that's what we thought. We arrived 2 days ago, parked our cars at the designated trailhead, and hiked about 6 miles into the national forest. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. No sounds of passing cars, no distant hum of civilization, just the crunch of leaves under our boots and the occasional bird call overhead. It felt peaceful at first, almost meditative. But looking back, I realized the silence wasn't normal. There weren't nearly enough birds. We set up camp near a small stream, pitched our tents, built a fire, and spent the first night drinking cheap whiskey and telling ghost stories. The usual campfire routine. Everything felt normal. We were laughing, joking, completely unaware that something had already noticed us. The next morning, we decided to hike further off trail, looking for a good place to fish. That's when we found it. An abandoned campsite. It was deep in the woods, far from any marked trails. We almost walked right past it, but Jake noticed the glint of something metal in the underbrush, a mess kit, half buried in dirt. Then we saw the tent. It was still standing but partially collapsed, the fabric torn in places as if something had been clawing at it. Nearby, a backpack lay open, its contents strewn across the ground. A sleeping bag had been dragged halfway out of the tent, as if someone had tried to crawl out but never made it. At first, we thought maybe it belonged to some unlucky campers who got scared off by a bear. But then Olivia pointed out something that made my stomach turn. The fire pit was still warm. Whoever had been here left recently. Not hours ago. Maybe minutes. That was when we noticed the footprints. They led away from the camp in a single file line, disappearing into the dense trees. No scattered tracks, no signs of struggle, just a perfect trail of human footprints that stopped abruptly about 20 feet away. As if the people who made them had simply vanished. No one spoke. We just stood there, listening. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No wind. No birds. Nothing. Jake finally broke the tension with an uneasy laugh. All right, I'm officially creeped out. Let's go. No one argued. We hiked back to our own campsite in near silence, suddenly hyper-aware of how far we were from civilization. We tried to brush it off, tried to act like we weren't unnerved. But that night, something changed. The forest felt wrong. The wind picked up, shaking the branches overhead, but it wasn't the sound of rustling leaves that kept us awake. It was the whispers. Low. Faint. Impossible to tell which direction they were coming from. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, maybe the wind playing tricks on me. But then Sam sat up in his sleeping bag and whispered, "Do you guys hear that?" We all heard it. Then, a twig snapped right outside our tent. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap, expecting to see a raccoon or maybe a deer. But when I shined the light into the trees, the forest was empty. No animals. No movement. Just the trees. Watching. I barely slept that night. Tomorrow, I'll post an update. But if anyone has ever come across an abandoned campsite with no people, just footprints that stop in the middle of nowhere, please, tell me what the hell we found. Part 2, Something Took Our Stuff Last Night. Posted by you/Ryan Wanders 2 days ago. I didn't want to post this. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just letting my imagination get the better of me. But after what happened last night, I need to put this out there. Maybe someone will read it and tell me we're overreacting. Maybe someone will recognize what's happening. Or maybe someone will tell us how to get the hell out of here. Morning after the whispers. We woke up to find our camp in absolute chaos. Jake was the first one out of his tent. I heard him curse under his breath, then yell for the rest of us. By the time I crawled out of my sleeping bag, everyone was already outside, staring at the mess around us. Our food supply, completely ruined. The cooler had been flipped over, its contents ripped apart and scattered across the ground. Granola bars and trail mix were torn open and left uneaten, like something had shredded the packaging just for the sake of it. Even the cans of beans we brought had deep scratches across the metal, like something with claws had been trying to get inside. But that wasn't the worst part. Nothing was missing. Not a single item had been taken. Just destroyed. Could have been a bear, Sam muttered, rubbing his arms against the morning chill. But we all knew that didn't make sense. Bears don't just tear things up for fun and then leave. They take food. They eat. And then Olivia found her journal. The journal entries I didn't write. She always keeps a small leather-bound notebook with her when she hikes, writing little things down, what trails we took, what plants she saw, thoughts about the trip. It had been inside her backpack when we went to sleep. Now, it was lying in the dirt, its pages open and fluttering in the breeze. At first, she thought maybe it had just fallen out during the commotion. But when she picked it up, her face went pale. She flipped through the pages quickly, her breathing turning shaky. Then she showed us. The last few entries in the journal weren't hers. She swore up and down that she hadn't written them. And looking at the jagged, uneven scrawl filling the pages, I believed her. It looked rushed, erratic, like someone had been scribbling in a frenzy. I took the journal from her hands, my stomach twisting into knots as I read the words. They are watching. Do not leave the path. We are already dead. The final entry was written in her own handwriting. Same way she always writes, same style. But she never wrote it. It said, "We won't make it out." Olivia swore she didn't write those words. That she had never written anything like that. But there they were, staring back at us from the page. That was when Sam lost it. "We need to leave, now. We need to go," he said, already stuffing his things back into his pack. "This isn't normal. We shouldn't be here." We didn't argue. We wanted to leave. But when we pulled out our GPS devices, none of them were working. My phone wouldn't turn on at all. Emily's GPS watch was frozen on coordinates that made no sense. Jake's compass. Spinning wildly, unable to find north. "We head back the way we came," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We don't need technology. We follow the damn trail markers." No one disagreed. We packed up in record time, moving fast, barely talking. The whole time, I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see something standing there, just watching. We started hiking back toward the cars, trying to keep our cool. But after about an hour, Olivia stopped dead in her tracks. Her voice was barely a whisper. "We've been here before." I looked around. My stomach dropped. She was right. We were back at the abandoned campsite. The footprints that weren't ours. None of us spoke for a long moment. We just stood there, staring at the empty, half-collapsed tent. The open backpack. The cold fire pit. Emily started shaking her head, muttering to herself. "This isn't possible." We didn't turn around. We followed the markers. We stayed on the trail. And yet, somehow, we had looped right back to where we started. That was when Jake pointed at the ground. "Those aren't our footprints." The dirt surrounding the old campsite was soft from last night's dew. Our own tracks were there, leading right up to the edge of the clearing. But beside them, there were others. Bare footprints. No shoes. No socks. Just bare feet pressed into the damp soil. Some were small, like a child's. Some were huge, too big to be human. And they all led out of the campsite and into the trees. Olivia turned to me, her voice trembling. "Ryan, take a picture." I reached for my camera. Then I heard it. A breath. Right behind me. Cold, too close, like someone standing inches away. I spun around, but nothing was there. Nothing at all. We're back at our own camp now. We're trying to stay calm. Trying to figure out what to do next. But I can feel it. The forest feels different now. Like it knows we're here. And tonight? I don't think we'll be alone. If anyone has experienced anything like this, please tell me what's happening. I don't think this is just some weird hiking accident. I think, we're not supposed to be here. Part 3, We Keep Getting Lost. Posted by you/Ryan Wanders 1 day ago. We should have been back by now. We should be sitting in the car, blasting the AC, laughing about how we let ourselves get freaked out by some weird footprints and a couple of bad nights in the woods. We should be on the road, heading home, telling ourselves that nothing actually happened. But we're still here. And no matter how far we walk, we can't get out. The paths that lead nowhere. This morning, we tried again. We packed up what little gear we had left, checked the maps, reoriented ourselves. Olivia, who's the best at navigation, swore up and down that she knew exactly which direction we needed to go. We double-checked. Triple-checked. This time, we were sure. We walked for hours. The sun climbed high, heat pressing down on us, sweat dripping down our backs. We barely spoke, too focused on moving, on putting as much distance between us and whatever the hell was out there last night. But when we finally stopped to rest, Emily looked up, her face pale. "Tell me I'm wrong," she said. I followed her gaze. The same abandoned campsite. We had walked in a perfect circle. Jake cursed and threw his pack on the ground. No way. That's impossible. But there it was, the collapsed tent, the fire pit, the backpack, the bare footprints leading into the trees. Like a sick joke, like something was toying with us. Olivia started whispering under her breath, gripping her journal so hard her knuckles turned white. "This place isn't letting us leave," she said. And the worst part? I believed her. The forest is changing. It's subtle. If we weren't paying attention, we might not have noticed. But we did. The trees aren't where they should be. Landmarks we passed earlier, like the fallen log near our first camp, or the rock formation by the creek, are gone. Or different. They've shifted, like the entire forest is rearranging itself when we're not looking. Sam climbed a tree, hoping to get a better view. When he got to the top, he froze. "I don't see the road," he called down. That didn't make sense. We weren't that far from the main trailhead. Even deep in the woods, you should be able to see the break in the trees, the line where civilization begins again. But Sam scanned the horizon, turning in slow, shaky circles, before climbing back down. "There's nothing," he said. "Just trees. Everywhere." Then he looked at me. His voice was tight, barely above a whisper. "And, man. I don't think we're alone. Something is following us." We set up camp again because we had no choice. The sun was starting to set, and we didn't want to risk moving in the dark. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but we all felt it. We're being watched. Not in the paranoid, "it's just your imagination," kind of way. This is different. This is real. We keep hearing movement in the trees. Not animals. Something bigger. The snapping of branches, the soft crunch of leaves, the weight of footsteps too deliberate to be random. And then there are the voices. Not whispers this time. Not the wind playing tricks on us. These are real voices. Low, murmuring, just at the edge of hearing. And the worst part? They sound like us. I heard my own voice whispering my name. Jake swears he heard Emily crying, but when he turned to check on her, she was fast asleep in her tent. Olivia says she saw something just beyond the firelight. A figure, tall and thin, standing between the trees. When she blinked, it was gone. We keep telling ourselves we're imagining things. That exhaustion and fear are getting to us. But deep down, we know the truth. We were never alone out here. Olivia is acting strange. She won't stop writing in that damn journal. At first, I thought she was just documenting everything, trying to make sense of it. But earlier, when she fell asleep by the fire, I picked it up. I just wanted to see if she had noticed anything we missed. She had. The last few pages were filled with frantic, disjointed sentences. It knows us. The path isn't real. We shouldn't have looked at the footprints. And the very last entry, written over and over in shaky, jagged handwriting. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. When I put the journal down, Olivia's eyes snapped open. She grabbed my wrist, too fast, too hard. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I shook my head. She stared past me, into the dark. "They're getting closer. We keep losing time." I swear it was just after midnight when I finally lay down in my tent. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. Not with everything we'd seen, everything we'd heard. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. Then, in the blink of an eye, the sun was rising. I don't remember falling asleep. None of us do. It's like time just skipped. One moment, it was night. The next, daylight was spilling through the trees. Jake checked his watch. It was frozen at 3:12 a.m. None of us remember anything from those missing hours. But something happened. I know, because when I stepped out of my tent this morning, I found something waiting for me. My camera. The one I always keep zipped inside my pack. It was sitting in the middle of our camp. And when I turned it on, there was a new video. A recording taken sometime during the night. The footage is dark, mostly static, but for a few seconds, just a few, I see something. Our campsite. Our tents. The fire, burned low. And us. All 5 of us, standing in a row, motionless, facing the trees. We're just, standing there. Not talking. Not moving. Just staring. And then, all at once, we turn toward the camera. But the faces looking back aren't ours. We have to get out. I don't care if the trail keeps leading us in circles. I don't care if we have to walk through the night. We're leaving. I'm posting this now while I still have the chance. While I still remember who I am. Because after tonight, I'm not sure if we'll still be us. Part 4, Olivia is gone. Posted by you/Ryan Wanders 6 hours ago. I woke up to silence. Not the kind of peaceful, early morning quiet you'd expect in the woods, where birds start singing before the sun even rises, but something else entirely. It was the kind of silence that felt unnatural, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears like the entire world was holding its breath. It was only when I sat up and looked around that I noticed the real problem. Olivia was gone. Her tent was still there, zipped up just as she had left it before we went to sleep, her backpack resting against the side like she hadn't even touched it. Her boots, which she never would have left behind, were sitting neatly beside the entrance. But she was nowhere to be found. No sign of a struggle, no disturbed dirt, no broken branches leading away. It was as if she had simply vanished into the air, leaving behind only one thing, her journal, placed carefully in the center of her sleeping bag, open to a page we had never seen before. Scrawled across the paper in her handwriting, clear and deliberate, were the words. I am not lost. I am home now. The hours that never existed. None of us remember falling asleep. It happened again, just like before. One moment, we were wide awake, sitting around the fire, forcing ourselves to stay alert, to fight off the creeping exhaustion that threatened to drag us under. The next thing we knew, the sun was filtering through the trees, casting long, golden streaks across the forest floor. But none of us remembered the hours in between. Not a single one of us could recall even closing our eyes. No gradual descent into sleep, no restless tossing or turning, just nothing. A complete blackout. And when we woke up, Olivia was gone. Emily was the first to start calling her name, stepping away from the camp and searching the trees with wild, frantic eyes. Sam followed close behind, scanning the ground for footprints, any sign that she had walked away, that she had left on her own. But there was nothing. The dirt around her tent was completely undisturbed, not a single footprint leading away. Then there was Jake. He didn't panic like the rest of us. He didn't rush to look for her or call out her name into the empty morning air. Instead, he just stood there, staring into the trees, his expression unreadable. When I finally snapped at him, demanding to know why he wasn't helping us search, he simply blinked and said something that made my blood run cold. She was never going to leave. Something is wrong with Jake. I don't know when it started, but Jake isn't acting like himself anymore. At first, I thought it was just the stress, the exhaustion catching up to him, but now I'm not so sure. He barely speaks, barely reacts to anything we say. It's like he's watching everything unfold from behind a thick layer of glass, distant and detached, as if none of this is actually happening to him. I caught him standing at the edge of the clearing earlier, staring at the trees with a look I couldn't quite understand. His lips were moving, but no sound was coming out, like he was whispering something just beneath his breath. When I stepped closer, his entire body stiffened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. I asked him what he was saying, but he didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. The new entries in Olivia's journal. When the search for Olivia turned up nothing, we sat in the center of camp, trying to think of our next move. The silence between us felt suffocating, every second stretching longer than the last. It was Emily who finally reached for Olivia's journal, her fingers shaking as she flipped through the pages. We had expected the usual, the neat, careful handwriting of someone documenting the trip, notes about the trails we took, little sketches of trees and plants. But that's not what we found. The last few pages were different. The handwriting had changed, the careful, controlled letters replaced by something frantic, erratic. Some of the words were smudged, almost like the ink had been smeared by trembling hands. They know us. The paths are wrong. We were never supposed to see the footprints. Page after page, the words repeated, over and over, until we reached the last one. There, written in letters so jagged they nearly tore through the paper, was a single phrase. I see them. They see me. Emily dropped the book like it had burned her, scrambling away from it as if the words themselves were dangerous. Sam rubbed his hands over his face, muttering under his breath that none of this made any sense. I didn't say anything. I just looked at Jake. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even confused. He just looked at me, his expression blank, and asked, "Do you hear them yet? The forest is moving again. It's happening again. The paths don't lead where they should, the trees seem closer than before, and every time we turn around, something feels different." We walked for 2 hours trying to find the way back to the trailhead, but we only ended up right back at our camp. I swear to God, the clearing was smaller than when we left it. The trees are closing in. And then, as if things weren't already bad enough, we saw something that made every last bit of denial shatter into pieces. Emily screamed first. We turned to see what she was pointing at, and there, standing just beyond the tree line, was a figure. It was wearing Olivia's hoodie. But it wasn't Olivia. She, or it, stood completely still, her back turned to us, head tilted slightly to the side. At first, we thought it really was her, that maybe she had been lost and had finally found her way back. But then she took a step backward. Not forward. Not toward us. Backward. Without turning around, without looking, she took another step. Then another. Moving deeper into the woods, retreating into the shadows of the trees, her body stiff and unnatural, like something was pulling her away. I ran after her. I don't even remember making the decision, I just knew I had to stop her, had to reach her before she disappeared completely. But as soon as my foot hit the edge of the clearing, Jake grabbed me. His fingers dug into my arm so hard I thought he might break something. "That's not her," he whispered. His voice was eerily calm. "That's not Olivia." I stopped struggling. I let him pull me back. And when I turned to look again, she was gone. "We have to leave, now. We're leaving. I don't care what it takes. I don't care if we have to walk through the night, if we have to run until our legs give out. I don't care if the trees keep leading us in circles. We are getting out of this place. Because if we don't, I think we're going to end up just like Olivia. Or worse. We're going to become the things watching us from the trees." Part 5, We're Not Alone Here. Posted by you/Ryan Wanders 4 hours ago. I can't shake the feeling that we are no longer just lost. The fear of being stranded in the wilderness has been completely replaced by something worse, something I can't even put into words. The longer we stay out here, the more I feel like the forest itself is watching us, like it's adjusting, closing in around us in ways we don't fully understand. The trees are too still, the air is too quiet, and the paths we take keep leading us back to places we have already been. I know this sounds insane, but I swear to God, it's not just the 4 of us out here anymore. After what happened with Olivia, none of us wanted to stay in that campsite a second longer. We packed up as quickly as we could, barely speaking, moving in complete silence except for the occasional sharp intake of breath whenever someone heard a branch snap in the distance. Even Jake, who had spent the last 2 days acting as if none of this was real, was finally starting to crack. His usual stoic demeanor was gone, replaced with something else, something eerily detached. He wasn't scared, not like the rest of us, but he wasn't himself either. He walked at the back of the group, head tilted slightly downward, not looking at anyone, not saying a word. Every time I glanced back at him, I swore I saw his lips moving, like he was whispering something too quietly for the rest of us to hear. The plan was simple: keep moving west, don't stop for anything, find the main trail, and get the hell out of here. But we never found the trail. No matter how many miles we walked, no matter how carefully we navigated, the deeper we went, the more unfamiliar everything became. I kept checking my compass, but the needle was spinning wildly, refusing to point north. Emily kept pulling out the map, running her finger over the lines again and again, whispering that none of this made sense, that we should have hit the marked trail hours ago. And then we found the first sign that we were not alone. It started with the sounds. At first, I thought it was just the wind, that low, hollow howl that moves through the trees when the air shifts. But as we walked, it grew clearer, more defined. Voices. Not loud, not distinct, just a murmur, layered over itself, blending with the rustling of the leaves. I stopped walking and held up a hand for the others to stop as well, straining to listen. The voices were too familiar. It was us. I could hear my own voice. Not an echo, not a trick of the mind, but my voice, tangled in the whispers that floated through the trees. And it wasn't just me. I could hear Emily, I could hear Sam, and worst of all, I could hear Olivia. Her voice was the clearest. She was laughing. Not the way she used to, not like she was actually happy, but something else, something cold, something distant. The sound made my stomach twist, my skin prickle with something close to panic. Emily grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin as she looked up at me, wide-eyed. "Tell me you hear that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded. Sam was shaking his head, muttering to himself that this wasn't happening, that we were just exhausted, that the wind was playing tricks on us. But deep down, we all knew the truth. We were hearing ourselves. And we were not alone. Then the trees shifted. I don't know how else to describe it. One moment, we were standing in the clearing, surrounded by the same thick stretch of forest we had been trying to escape from all day, and the next, the trees seemed closer. Not just an illusion, not just a paranoid trick of the mind. They had actually moved. And in between them, just barely visible through the dense shadows, something was watching us. Emily gasped first, stepping back, her hand flying to her mouth as she tried to suppress a scream. I turned in the direction she was looking, and my breath caught in my throat. There, standing in the space where the forest should have been empty, was Olivia. But it wasn't her. Her body was too still. Her arms hung limply at her sides, her posture unnaturally rigid. Her face was hidden in shadow, her head tilted downward, as if she couldn't, or wouldn't, look at us. But the worst part? Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering. Just slightly, just enough for me to notice that something was horribly, impossibly wrong. And then she moved. Not like a person. Not like something alive. She didn't step forward, she glided. Smooth, effortless, unnatural. She didn't make a sound, didn't disturb a single leaf as she drifted toward us, slow and deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. Jake was the only one who didn't move. Emily and Sam had already started backing away, their bodies trembling, their eyes locked onto the thing that looked like Olivia. But Jake? He just stood there, watching. His lips were moving again. The thing in the trees stopped. It tilted its head slightly to the side, as if studying us. Then, without a sound, it disappeared. Not into the trees. Not into the shadows. It just vanished. Like it had never been there at all. Emily was crying. Sam was shaking. I was gripping my flashlight so hard my fingers were cramping. And Jake? Jake just smiled. A small, knowing smile. "We should keep walking," he said, his voice eerily calm. And then, without waiting for a response, he turned and started walking into the woods. Not in the direction we had planned. Not toward safety. But deeper. Right toward where Olivia had been. We had no choice but to follow. Part 6, The Watchers Are Us. Posted by you/Ryan Wanders 3 hours ago. We are losing time again. The hours are slipping between our fingers like grains of sand, and I am terrified that soon, we will wake up and not remember who we were before we came into these woods. Every second feels like it is dragging us deeper into something we cannot escape. Something that wants us here. I don't know how much longer we have before we become part of it. The path is gone. We walked for what felt like hours, following Jake's lead because we had no other choice. He was the only one who seemed certain of anything, the only one who kept moving forward without hesitation, his footsteps confident even when there was no visible trail in front of him. Every time Emily or I suggested stopping to check the map, to figure out where we actually were, he would just shake his head and say, "The path isn't real." At first, I thought he was just delirious, exhausted beyond reason, his mind unraveling from fear and lack of sleep. But the further we walked, the more I started to wonder if he was right. The trees have stopped looking familiar. The deeper we go, the more wrong everything feels. The air is too thick, almost suffocating, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. The ground feels softer, like we are walking over something not quite solid. And the light? It barely reaches us anymore. Even though the sun should still be high in the sky, the forest is drenched in shadow, and I can't tell if it's because the trees are getting denser or because the sky itself is changing. But the worst part? There are no sounds anymore. No birds. No wind. No distant rustling of animals moving through the underbrush. Nothing. Just us. And I am starting to think even that is a lie. The faces in the trees. I don't know when I started seeing them. Maybe they were always there, just beyond the edges of my vision, waiting for me to notice. But now, every time I glance between the trees, I swear I see something, a shape, a flicker of movement, the suggestion of a face staring back at me. Not human. Not animal. Something else. I tried telling myself it was just a trick of the light, the play of shadows in the branches, but when I turned my head too quickly, I saw them move. Not away, not deeper into the forest, but closer. They shift when I blink. Emily sees them too. I can tell because she won't stop shaking, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she's trying to hold her body together. Every time I catch her gaze, she looks like she is on the verge of tears, but she refuses to say anything. I think she is too scared that speaking will make them more real. Sam won't even look at us anymore. And Jake? Jake smiles. The video on my camera. I don't know why I even checked. Maybe I was hoping that, somehow, watching the footage from last night would prove to me that I was imagining everything, that the whispers in the dark and the flickering shapes in the trees were just products of exhaustion and paranoia. But now, I wish I had never pressed play. The video starts the way I expect it to, grainy, distorted, the low hum of static buzzing over the dim outline of our camp. The fire is nothing but embers, pulsing faintly in the night. I can see the shapes of our tents, the vague, unmoving forms of our bodies inside them. Then, movement. At first, I thought it was one of us shifting in our sleep, but then I realized it wasn't coming from inside the tents. The camera pans. And I see them. Figures, standing at the edge of the clearing. Dozens of them. They don't move. They don't blink. They just stand there, silent, their heads tilted slightly to the side, as if watching. And then, after what feels like forever, they step forward. One by one, they break from the darkness, moving in eerie synchronization, their limbs bending slightly too much in places where joints shouldn't exist. They do not make a sound, not even when their feet press into the leaves, not even when they come so close to the tents that I expect them to reach inside. And then I see us. We are standing with them. Not asleep in our tents, not huddled around the dying fire, but standing among the figures, our faces empty, our eyes black. The screen glitches. When it clears, they are all looking at the camera. And then, the video cuts out. We are becoming them. I don't know what to do anymore. Running is pointless. Every path leads back to the same place. Every time we sleep, we wake up missing time, missing pieces of ourselves. I am terrified that soon, we will forget who we are. That we will wake up and be one of them. Jake hasn't spoken in hours. He just keeps walking. I think he already knows what's coming. Or worse, he wants it. I don't know how much longer I have before I stop being me. But if I disappear, if this is my last post, please remember us. Because I am starting to think that is exactly what this place wants us to forget. Part 7, We Were Never Meant to Leave. Posted by you/Ryan Wanders 1 hour ago. I don't know if anyone will ever read this. I don't even know if I'm still real, if I still exist in the same way I did before we walked into these woods. The things I see, the thoughts in my head, the way time slips through my fingers, it all feels wrong now, like my mind is being stretched, pulled apart by something I was never supposed to understand. But if I can finish this post, if I can leave some kind of record, maybe someone out there will know what happened to us. Maybe someone will remember us when we are no longer able to remember ourselves. Because I don't think we are getting out. Jake led us to the end. For hours, we followed him. There was no reasoning with him anymore, no begging him to turn back. He moved with purpose, cutting through the trees like he knew exactly where he was going, like he had known all along. Emily refused to let go of my arm. Her grip was so tight I thought she might leave bruises, but I didn't tell her to stop. We needed to keep hold of each other. If we let go, we would be lost. Sam walked in silence behind us, his face blank, his eyes unfocused, as if he was already halfway gone. I kept checking over my shoulder, convinced that any second, I would see something behind us, shadows moving, faces in the trees, those impossible figures that had been following us from the very beginning. But there was nothing. Just the woods, stretching endlessly in every direction. And then, all at once, the trees ended. The clearing that shouldn't exist. The space in front of us was wrong. A clearing, massive and silent, stretching further than it should have, as if the forest had simply torn itself open. The air was thick, dense, humming with something unseen. At the center of it stood a structure. Not a building. Not a ruin. A door. It was old, the wood warped and blackened, but it was not rotting. There was something unnatural about it, something that made my stomach twist in ways I couldn't explain. There was no frame, no wall to hold it in place, just the door, standing alone in the clearing, untouched by time. Jake walked toward it without hesitation. "Don't," I whispered. I don't know why I whispered. Maybe I was afraid the forest was listening. Maybe it was. Jake didn't stop. He reached out and placed his hand against the door. It swung open. There was no room beyond it, no other side to step through. There was only darkness, stretching endlessly into nothing. A void, bottomless and infinite. And in that blackness, something moved. Not one thing. Many. They stepped forward, one by one, emerging from the abyss with slow, deliberate grace. Their forms were shifting, flickering between shapes that almost looked human. But they weren't. They never were. I saw my own face among them. And then Emily screamed. The final choice. Sam collapsed first. His body hit the ground like a marionette with its strings cut, his eyes rolling back, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Emily was clutching her head, sobbing, whispering over and over again that she didn't want to forget. And Jake? Jake was smiling. I grabbed Emily's arm and tried to pull her back, but she didn't move. She just kept staring at the figures in front of us, her body trembling, her face twisted in horror. I knew then that we couldn't fight this. We were never meant to. Jake turned toward me, his expression calm, almost peaceful. "This is where we were always going to end up," he said, and I could hear the truth in his voice. He was already gone. The figures took another step forward. Emily's breathing hitched. Sam's body started to fade. I didn't know what to do. My mind screamed at me to run, to grab Emily and bolt into the trees, but I knew that if I turned around, if I tried to run, we would only find ourselves right back here. The forest would never let us go. Because we were never supposed to leave. Becoming one of them. The last thing I remember is the sound. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was deep, a low whisper inside my skull, curling around my thoughts, twisting them into something I no longer recognized. The moment it touched me, I knew. The figures were not hunting us. They were waiting for us. Because the moment we stepped into this forest, the moment we followed the footprints that should not have been there, we had already started to change. We had already become them. I don't know what's left of me now. I don't know if I even exist beyond this post. Maybe I never did. Maybe I was already gone long before I started writing, just an echo trying to remember what it felt like to be human. But if you are reading this, if you ever find yourself deep in the woods and you see a trail of footprints leading to an abandoned camp, if you hear whispers that sound like your own voice, if you see shadows shifting between the trees, turn back. Do not follow them. Do not let them see you. And whatever you do, never step through the door. Thank you for watching this story to the end. Subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with new stories. I also look forward to your comments, criticisms and suggestions below this video.